Welcome to Deprogramming with your host, Teri Lynn, the show that explores mind control tactics used for millennia to shape our thoughts and beliefs. We dive deep with experts to understand the harsh reality of what is really going on and how to unwind the damage. Here's your host, Teri Lynn.
Welcome to episode 7 of Deprogramming. This episode is going to be a little bit different in that I'm going to present some ideas to ponder myself. What I'm going to present is a theory, like a lot of what we discuss here is. We need, as a collective, to start thinking more critically and deciphering what the actual truth is, in cases where there is one universal truth. I know most of the audience here does that to a great degree. But even the best of us can further hone in our skills. We need each other to make sense of where we are and to move forward in togetherness, as Alec Zeck and his friends have pointed out. Shout out, by the way, to Alec for his phenomenal work in doing his part in building this new society. If you're not familiar with him, I would encourage you to check him out. The theory I'm going to throw out on the table is in the realm of mass psychology, more specifically mass formation. It's more than just groupthink. As I've been delving into this subject, it has really opened my mind to how humans operate and leaves room for a lot of compassion. On that note, I have found if you take the time to sit down with anyone and hear their actual story and perspective of this experience they walk around in the world with, you would be hard-pressed to come away without compassion and understanding. On some level, we are all fragile and vulnerable. And on the other hand, we are also so powerful that we are a force to be reckoned with. I believe we need to appreciate and respect both attributes. It makes us unique. With that said, I think it's easy to see that something is happening to describe this almost robotic-like state the masses seem to be in. If you don't notice this, I'd encourage you to stick with me here and at least consider that it's happening. The lack of critical thought today is alarming. The question we'll consider after we define what it is that we're focusing on is why. The why gives us the wisdom and discernment. So, mass formation is a term that is being popularized by Mattias Desmet. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. He's a professor of clinical psychology, a psychoanalytic psychotherapist at Ghent University in Belgium, and he holds a master's degree in statistics. It's a very interesting combination. So he's definitely got some higher education behind him. And I believe he's put that to good use in this case by being able to think critically. I personally think that he raises some very good points. So mass formation is a type of social psychology, studying how individual behavior is influenced by a large group of people. It's a collective hypnosis that occurs when a population is under certain disconnected and fearful societal conditions. Those conditions need to be in place first. It's a process that leads to this end result of this hypnotic state. This has also been studied by Sigmund Freud, Floyd Allport, Gustav Le Bon, and many others actually. Mass formation psychosis is a term Robert Malone, who many are familiar with perhaps now, he's a medical doctor, that he's been using, and it denotes conditions, according to him, it denotes conditions that affect the mind, where there has been some loss of contact with reality, he says. Now, he's not insinuating that people are clinically mentally ill. So it's perhaps a misuse of the term in the strict psychological sense. It is known, however, that mob influence can leave an individual with disturbed thoughts and perceptions, unable to fully distinguish what's real from what's not. So getting back to Mattias Desmet, he has a new book out, and it's called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And it lays out how all of this develops, how it leads to totalitarianism, and what we must do to change the conditions that make these mass formation events possible. Totalitarian states are characterized by political repression, very strong control of the economy, large-scale censorship, mass surveillance, limited freedom of movement, and the use of state terrorism. That sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Anyone who has not been living under a rock right now can see that all of that is coming into play to a degree that nobody can really deny it anywhere you are in the world. So here's what he explains himself as to what this phenomenon is. I'll show the first clip of Desmet.
First, in a nutshell, what mass formation is. It's a specific kind of group formation which has a specific effect at the level of individual mental functioning. And for instance, it makes people radically incapable of taking a critical distance of what the group believes in, no matter how absurd the beliefs of the group become. People will still continue to buy into the narrative. And a second typical characteristic is that people who are in the grip of mass formation typically become radically willing to sacrifice everything that was important to them before the mass formation started. And a typical characteristic of mass formation is that it makes people radically intolerant for dissonant voices, to the extent that in the end, the masses typically start to commit atrocities towards the people that do not go along with them. That's in a nutshell the phenomenology of a mass formation.
So let's pick apart what he just said there. Quote, he says, it's a specific kind of group formation that has a specific effect at the level of individual mental functioning. So it begs the question, what is the specific effect it has on people's minds? Let's review other things that he said there. He mentioned 3 characteristics. The first one is it makes people radically incapable of taking a critical distance away from what the group believes, no matter how absurd. So that really could be, in our minds, attributed to any other group that is not us, right? Because there's a lot of us and them going on there, whether we admit it or not. We have that in our kind of programming. But the other 2 characteristics will give a little more insight as to the first characteristic. So the second one he mentions is people typically become radically willing to sacrifice everything that was important to them before the mass formation started. Okay, so you have a person who had values, had things that were important to them in their life, things that they were willing to sacrifice for and work for, expend resources for, and suddenly they're willing to sacrifice those things for something else, and we'll find out what that is. So we have a group that at this point is willing to sacrifice the things that were important to them. They are incapable of taking a critical distance away from this group that they are now being entrenched with, no matter how absurd the group's values, ideas, and probably actions are. Now, the third characteristic, when you have that scenario clearly in your mind, is it makes people radically intolerant also of dissonant voices, to the extent that they will commit atrocities to the people that do not go along with them. We saw some of the video footage there. We've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years. So now I'm going to show this graphic that shows the theory of what needs to be in place for mass formation to occur. So there's 4 pillars of mass formation in order of appearance. The first is loneliness, disconnected from a person's natural and social environment. The second one is sense of meaninglessness. And the third and kind of the fourth one I kind of put together in my mind is there's free-floating anxiety, aggression, and frustration. And what that means, it's not connected to a mental representation. There's nothing to be anxious about, so to speak. They can't really put their finger on it, and they're frustrated just in general, kind of a generalized anxiety, general aggression, general frustration. They feel out of control. Everything kind of piles up. They don't know why they feel this way and don't know what to do with all this anxiety or what or who to even blame. So let me show you another clip of Desmet explaining in his own words what this graphic means.
When very specific conditions are met, first and for all, the most central condition is a major part of the population needs to feel lonely. That's crucial.
Breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight.
We must enact an immediate stay-at-home order.
We're going to go visit Mom. I'm going to bring the whole family to see Mom. No.
We all need to stay home.
Stay at home.
Stay home.
Stay home.
Stay inside.
Stop socializing.
That's starting to take a toll. It's understandable. But we can't afford to stop now. Go home and stay home.
Once people feel disconnected from their environment, they will typically start to experience a lack of meaning making in life. And then, in a third step, once people feel socially isolated, confronted with lack of meaning making, they will be confronted with anxiety, frustration, and aggression. And under these conditions, if a narrative is distributed through the mass media, indicating an object of anxiety and a strategy to deal with this object of anxiety, they suddenly connect to one small object of fear, for instance the coronavirus, and then people don't feel lonely anymore. They feel connected again. But the new kind of social bond is highly problematic, just because the bond is never between individuals. It's always a social bond between individuals and the collective, through which an individual shows that its own individual interests are less important than the collective interests.
You are not doing this for yourself. It's so you don't kill other people.
You don't take it for yourself. You will take it for your family.
Sounds trite to say, but we're all in this together.
Okay, and that particular clip was a trailer for the upcoming film by Mickey Willis, I believe, Plandemic 3. So I thank him for that. And the first clip was actually coming from Del Bigtree's Highwire, and I'm going to be showing more clips of both of those interviews along the way. We have the explanation of the 4 pillars and how people get to that point. And then he mentions the reason for the frustration and aggression and anxiety that people feel in general is provided. And he mentions oftentimes it's from the media. And I'm sure that's, not always the case when these mass formations develop. But in this case, a lot of times, if it's going to be used for nefarious reasons, we have some kind of central voice, the media, perhaps. So a narrative is distributed that provides an object of anxiety and a strategy to deal with that anxiety, like was done during the witch hunts and the recent lockdowns. The states of mind happen first, then they have something to blame and a place to direct those feelings. Sometimes with violence. We've seen that in the last couple years especially. Some people will fall victim to attributing their anxiety to what is being presented to them via the media and be willing to participate in a strategy toward the object of their anxiety, no matter how absurd, because people will now experience symptomatic control over their anxiety. They find others who are acting out the same, and then they feel that they've found their tribe, which seems to help with the loneliness and sense of meaninglessness. However, it's not real. The social connectedness is not real. And the object of anxiety will keep changing because it never gets resolved. It's It's not real. This whole situation is contrived. It's suggested by Gustave Le Bon, the other person I mentioned earlier that has studied this, that the masses go through 3 main stages as part of what's considered to be a mass hypnosis. Another description of what's happening here. First is submergence. That's a phase characterized by losing individual identity, which is similar to the concept of de-individuation. De-individuation theory explains that being in a crowd lessens personal identity, guilt, self-evaluation, empathy, and other individual morality-related behaviors. This theory was then improved by Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. That's a very creepy experiment. If you go back to my episode 2 of Deprogramming with Dustin Broadberry, I think it was episode 2, he mentioned that, and we talked about that a little. That was an experiment, just to put it in context here, where they took college students and randomly chose them to be on one side or the other. It was a prison experiment, so some were guards and some were inmates. And they ended up to totally grasp and play the role of their particular side. If they were the inmates, they were the victims. And if they were the guards, which was super creepy, is they kind of massed together and they became awful. They just became awful people. What they did to the prisoners, and they all knew it was an experiment. So this de-individuation was shown in that experiment. Then the next thing he mentions, the other stage, is contagion. That's a phase characterized by having individuals' ideas and emotions greatly influenced by the dynamics of their surrounding masses. It's kind of like, I would say, groupthink, which again was shown in the prison experiments. The third phase is suggestion. This phase is where the group has developed a shared unconscious which affect their decisions and feelings. So now the subconscious has been infiltrated. So those are the 3 main stages that a group goes through in mass hypnosis. So this mass hypnosis, or this mass formation, it's a phenomenon that can happen in very small groups or on a worldwide scale, which was just proven because it happened for the first time in 2020. So in my research, I found that this process of mass formation starts with about 30% of the population fanatically believing a certain ideology, which can be created artificially through indoctrination propaganda. They believe only this narrative can be correct, no matter how absurd. They can no longer see past it, no matter what is presented before them. At this point in time, people feel they have control over their psychological discontent by participating in a strategy that may not make sense to each individual if they were in a psychologically healthy state and were thinking critically of things without the mass influence of the group or the influence of, let's say, the media. So individually, let's break this apart a little bit. Individually, if not in this groupthink, they would never carry out this strategy on their own. They would have more critical thinking. But with the groupthink, with this mass hypnosis, this mass formation going on, they don't seem to have that same critical thinking. Participation in the strategy has nothing to do with facts or logic. It's survival to preserve this new social bond created by fighting together to defeat the object of their collective anxiety and frustration. By obeying the strategy, people can go from a very negative, isolated state, as we talked about, to the polar opposite, a state of maximum connectedness, creating mental intoxication that makes the masses willing to go with anything, even if it's immoral or illogical. Is this process by accident? Can it be weaponized? The possible result or agenda of mass formation is to control and take power. If you're controlling a mass of people, you've just taken them through a psychological exercise, there has to be a goal there if it's done on purpose. So that would obviously be to control, which closely related to taking power. Let's get a little into totalitarianism. Mistaken beliefs of that ideology, for those that are in mass formation, is people get incapable of accepting uncertainty in life when they're going through this process. They want one answer, and the totalitarian leaders provide that answer. It's problem, created by them. Reaction, solution, created by them. Problem, reaction, solution. They will insert your missing purpose, which is really their purpose and meaning, into you, into the crowd, since you've been stripped of that. No critical thinking is needed. Now you are successfully in a state of hypnosis. And people, when they're to this point, they just want someone to provide an answer for them. They just want to be led. If you properly hypnotize someone, they won't be able to see something that is right in front of them. More interesting than that, they'll be able to see through the object as if it doesn't even exist, thus defying the laws of physical reality. Once the hypnotist releases them from the trance, they can once again see the object. I don't know about you, but I've definitely seen this in the last 2 years. I've seen this before that, and it always baffled me. Something so obvious to me, something so clear, a person can't see it, no matter how it's presented. With mass formation hypnosis regarding the death shot, consider this when wondering why people cannot see what is right in front of them. It takes a master hypnotist to break the spell, or a big shock. If you want to reach someone, then you'll need to unlock their mind like a locksmith. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until the big shock sets in. You need to bypass the conscious mind and go all the way to the subconscious. Spewing facts doesn't work on this particular condition. Believe me, I've tried it. It doesn't work. Not with people that are enmeshed in this hypnosis. We are fully hypnotized as young children. You could also call it programming, indoctrination. There's lots of words for it. A young child will be very open to suggestion and take things literally. That's how they're designed. They believe whatever you tell them. These commands that are installed end up forming our code. This process will form a foundational layer of beliefs that will shape our entire existence in this life. Deprogramming is a long and intense process. It's harder to overwrite old code than it is to install new code. It's harder, I'll say that again, to overwrite old code than it is to install new code. It's easier to get people to believe a lie than it is to get them to let go of that lie. Every one of us is indoctrinated. Every one of us is programmed on some level. This medical system, the cult medical system, this cult-like last 2 years If you think you're immune to cults, I'm sorry. You are all in some way in a cult. At some point in your life, if not now, you were in a cult. So none of us can point the finger at someone else and say, why were you so stupid? How could you fall for that? It just depends on how each of us is wired, our experiences, what we were indoctrinated with, experiences that we came across to define which cult we were going to get indoctrinated into. It's every single one of us. So what do? What's the answer? There's two things. One is find your ethics. Really, truly understand, find and develop your ethics and speak out in a way that you are able to. A lot of people think that if you just eliminate the elite or the predator class, that everything would be fine. And that's all we need to do, and that's the answer. I don't think so. I want to show you this clip from the High Wire again because it's so good, and then we'll talk about it.
There is an elite.
There is an elite.
There is an elite that relies very much on indoctrination and propaganda, that has all kind of ideological plans. We must be blind if we don't want to see that. These plans exist. They existed before the crisis, and they were pushed forward by the elite. There were large-scale, unprecedented indoctrination and propaganda campaigns, and so on. I'm 100% convinced of that.
Yeah.
But I think there is one thing important. We make a mistake, a serious mistake, if we reduce the problem to this elite. If we think that evil, to use that word, is only situated in the elite, that the only problem in the world, and that is the elite, and that the problem would be solved is if this elite no longer exists, then we make a serious mistake. For me, it's about that. The elite is part of the problem. If we think, for instance, that the problem would be solved, if we eliminate this elite, if we could destroy this elite in a violent revolution, then that would be the most destructive strategic choice we can make, the most self-destructive.
Self-destructive.
Yes, of course.
By destroying this small enemy outside of us, we destroy ourselves. How so?
They will destroy us.
They will destroy us.
Of course, because they will use our violence as a justification to destroy us, and we definitely will lose this game. But and even if we would succeed, and that is even more important, I think, as long as people continue to think in the same way, as long as people continue to be in the grip of this rationalist mechanist ideology, they will simply recreate the same elite.
They will recreate the same elite.
Nothing will change. That's so typical for totalitarianism. In a classical dictatorship, it makes sense to try to destroy the classical dictator, because if you succeed in doing so, the system will collapse. In a totalitarian state, it won't. The elite will simply be replaced, simply because the point of gravity of the system is always situated in the masses that are in the grip of a certain ideology. That's something extremely important, I think. So, I believe that the problem with conspiracy thinking, with what I call fanatical conspiracy thinking, the problem is not so much that you are wrong in the sense that there are no conspiracies. There are conspiracies. Conspiracies have always existed. But the problem is rather that everything is reduced to a conspiracy, and that the problem is reduced to a conspiracy. And in this way, automatically, from such an analysis, follows the strategical advice: this elite has to be destroyed. And that's naive and self-destructive. I rather would quote Solzhenitsyn, and I actually quote him in that chapter, I think, who said, it would be easy to believe that the problem of totalitarianism, I quote Solzhenitsyn from his famous book, The Gulag Archipelago, for which he received the Nobel Prize, and which was based on his experiences in the concentration camps in Russia. He said it would be easy to believe that the problem of totalitarianism is caused by one small evil group. But he said that the dividing line between good and evil does not run between people, it runs through every human being's heart.
People.
And that's the truth, I think. We have to be honest enough to admit, I think, that to a certain extent we are all part of the problem. We all participated in this mechanist, rationalist thinking.
People will recreate the same elite, even if they destroy them, because the trajectory of a system always is in the masses who are in the grip of a certain ideology. So we're all part of the problem. It's not just this one class. People were willing to participate in its creation. Think about that. We all participated to some degree. Some, a lot more. The real enemy is never another human, he says, but rather a certain worldview. This makes humans vulnerable for mass formation. So it's that ideology that created an elite class that thinks it's their duty to manipulate the population through indoctrination, propaganda, brainwashing, and psyops to create a new ideology. On some level, they think it's for our good. They think it's for our good. On some level. Even if we succeed in waking up the masses now, they will fall prey to a different story in a few years, and they'd be hypnotized again if we do not succeed in solving the real problem of this crisis. Namely, why did we as a society get in the state that a large part of the population feels anxious, depressed, a lack of sense-making, feels emotionally isolated? Why? That's the real problem. If we don't succeed in finding out where this problem comes from, then the masses will always be susceptible to leaders who try to lure them into a mass formation, right? We have to take away the vulnerability for that. So I think the real question in this crisis is, what is there in our view of humans and our world and the way in which we look at life that makes us experience a lack of sense-making? In my opinion, I think we must conclude that it's something in our materialistic, mechanistic view of humans and the world that leads up to radical destruction of the real societal structures and social basis. If you believe that human beings are biological machines, then this implies by definition that life is senseless. What would be the sense of life that is reduced to being only a little mechanistic part of a large, huge universe? There wouldn't be much. If you look at a human being like that, you'll end up concluding that life is meaningless, that you don't really have to invest energy in meaningful societal relations, that you don't have to follow ethical principles. And in this way, you destroy your psychological energy and your connectiveness and end up in free-floating anxiety and so on. That's just my opinion. Totalitarianism and mass formation always have one main characteristic. They are always self-destructive. In one way or another, the masses and the totalitarian systems are only capable of destruction, never for construction. Look at the mainstream history of Stalin or Hitler. It only ended up in destruction. We can't know what's going to happen. Instead, what we can do is we can stick to ethical principles. What do you stand for? We have to all do that work. What do you stand for? Who are you? What do you believe? How far are you willing to go for what you know? Not just believe, but what you know. What it does look like, however, is a small group will choose to stay loyal to ethics and refuse to go along with the system. They'll celebrate one central virtue, encouraging all to have their own opinion at the same time. That's the opposite of mass formation. They will bind to one another, not on an ideology. They will go through a very fast evolution as humans. They'd be 10 to 30% of the population. Usually it's about 30% of a population that gets stuck in a mass phenomenon or hypnosis. An additional 35 to 45% usually does not want to raise a dissonant voice in the public space because they are scared of the consequences. So usually about 70% shut up, 30% because they're convinced by the mainstream narrative, and 40% because they don't dare to speak out. Then there's the additional 20 to 30% who does not go along with the narrative and says it in certain situations. I'm going to show one last clip about hypnosis from Plandemic 3.
After a few months, it became clear to me that the only mechanism that could explain what was happening in society was what is usually referred to as mass formation.
I even run with a mask on. And also because I want to make it be a symbol for people to see that that's the kind of thing you should be doing.
I wear a mask to school. I wear a mask to school. Hi ho the Dario. I wear a mask to school.
Sweden's with 0 new COVID cases, despite the country dropping the mandatory wearing of masks.
The process of mass formation is identical to hypnosis. An individual that is in the grip of a process of mass formation typically becomes radically blind for everything that goes against the narratives where the masses or the group believes in. They seem to have lost all interest in the things that were important to them before the mass formation started, which make them radically willing to self-sacrifice, to sacrifice themselves for the collective.
Obviously, you don't like to tell people what to do, but sometimes for the good of society, that's necessary.
They become radically intolerant for dissonant voices. And this typically goes further and further and further. People who do not go along with the masses are stigmatized, and in the end, the masses typically are inclined to destroy the people who do not go along with them. And they do so as if it is an ethical duty to do so. That's something that was observed in all major examples of mass formation in history. Whether we are talking about the Crusades or the witch hunts or the French Revolution or the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, in all the major mass formations, we notice the same end point of the process, namely the tendency to commit cruelties, usually to destroy the people who do not go along with the masses, and that it is exactly that what makes the process so dangerous.
This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
The people who are not getting vaccines, it's time to start shaming them.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
F them, their freedom. I want my freedom to live.
No, screw your freedom. You're a schmuck for not wearing a mask.
We have to stop coddling the morons who will not get the shot.
Shame on you.
No mask, get out! Put on your mask or get off.
Put your mask on! Put your fucking mask on! Put your mask on!
Mattias Desmet says, quote, "For me, what I hope for the future is that a new society will emerge which functions according to real, original, ethical principles. And I think it will be a small group who rediscovers these principles and who reintroduces them." So using this reasoning, a small group will introduce this after getting in touch with it themselves. First, they'll speak out. The large group's power will decrease, while the small group's power will increase. The large group will essentially then destroy themselves. Gustave Le Bon said, for instance, that it's very difficult if mass formation happens at the very large scale in a society. It is very difficult to wake up the masses as to what is truly going on. He says that usually you can't do this. It's impossible because the masses only wake up after a lot of destruction. But he says if people who do not agree with the mass narrative, if they continue to talk, they prevent the masses from fomenting their large crimes. So it's very important. You can make mass formation less deep by continuing to talk. So that is what we all have to do. We all have to keep in mind our situations, what we're capable of, and how. What is the best way? What is our gifts? Where do our skill sets lie? What is our way that we're going to speak out? And remember, example is huge. People watch what you do more than they listen to what you say. So I want to show, actually, I lied. This is one last clip from Plandemic about people speaking out.
I think that mass formation shows us that people are intrinsically social beings. And if they feel lonely, they will suddenly do everything to feel connected again, even sacrificing themselves. In the confrontation with emerging totalitarianism, the most important thing is always that the dissonant voices continue to speak out in a as sincere, honest, and peaceful way as possible. Non-violent resistance is what always works best. It's a bit cynical, but it is in the end good news. That mass formation and totalitarianism always destroys itself in a relatively short time span. If the people who do not go along with the system continue to speak out, they will succeed.
What sets the group apart who does not accept the groupthink? Independent thinking skills? People that don't necessarily identify with the group in the first place, but rather they try to be as reasonable as possible? I don't think anyone knows. What is the totalitarian plan that is in place right now? And in case you didn't know, there is one in place right now. I'll leave you with one last clip on that, but first I want to thank you for spending some time with me today. I know time is one of, if not the most precious commodity we have. Stay tuned for my next episode with a very special guest who will talk about the most insidious type of programming that affects us all. But for her, she narrowly escaped with her life due to being in the center of it, and she has made it her mission to speak about it and the serious deprogramming that she went through to get her own mind back. Her story is absolutely incredible. This is Teri Lynn with Deprogramming.
This is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. It's a totalitarian state being developed right now all over the world. It is the inventory and control plan. Inventory and control of all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all food, all energy, all information, and all human beings in the world. And this is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations back in 1992. It's a United Nations plan. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. And so many of us around the world think that well, sustainable development, it just sounds so great. Isn't it about recycling and creative reuse and creating energy and food resources for everyone? And the answer is no, it really is not. It's about moving populations into city centers, concentrated city centers, and clearing them out of the rural areas. all systems have to be brought into harmony in order to control them all. Because when systems don't meet, when they're out of balance or not in sync with one another, they can't be controlled centrally. And the goal of Agenda 21 is one world government and total control from a central unit. Every nation that signed on to Agenda 21 has its local Agenda 21 plan. People in the United States are completely unaware of this. If I go out and talk about this, the United States press attacks me and calls me, which is totally ridiculous. It is but it's not a theory. It's a fact. The three pillars of United Nations Agenda 21 are economy, ecology, and equity, the three E's. And everyone sort of thinks that they know what that means, the idea of social equity. It must mean that, well, everyone's going to have access to clean water and clean air, and no one's property is going to be used as a dumping ground because they are at a poverty level. But really what social equity is about impoverishing huge portions of the population and bringing down the developed nations. Everything that we're looking at now is destined to collapse our economies. It's a totalitarian state being developed right now all over the world. And what major corporations want in this development is to be able to have full movement of workers without borders or boundaries, to be able to move their goods through without regulations, and to reduce wages. And so this is the goal. So this is what you find with social equity. And of course, economy and ecology is about, these are the three circles: economy, ecology, and social equity. And where they meet in the center is balance. But really that balance is a communitarian balance. So it's not balance of well-being of the people. What it is it's a balance for corporations so that they can exploit and control and have populations in an area, in tightly packed, dense areas, so that they can be surveilled and managed. And this is what that balance looks like as far as the development of a totalitarian state is. The mainstream media is owned by 5 major corporations, and you're not going to get this information from the mainstream press. So you need to be your own press. You need to educate yourself. You need to get out there and educate your neighbors, your community, your real community. You need to help your children understand that they're being indoctrinated from pre-kindergarten to postgraduate school. All of us have a responsibility to ourselves and to others. This is true community, to work for personal freedom. And always remember that even though we work as a group, if we do work as a group, we're all individuals in those groups, and we answer only to ourselves. And this is essential. It's essential as free human beings. This is what we are. We are free, and we need to continue to be free. And I do believe that we will win, but we have to become aware that there is a fight, and then make our friends and our neighbors and our community aware as well, and work together.
You've been listening to Deprogramming with host Teri Lynn. To connect to Teri or to check out our other shows, head to lifesource.global. And don't forget, hit the like, subscribe and share buttons. This show has been brought to you by Source Light Productions.